So all vaccines that come out for emergency use authorization are now being surveyed by the public health authorities in the countries that those vaccines are being deployed. Yeah. So the vaccine team ourselves, we're not responsible for collecting that data. It's something that is done obviously independently of us. It's completely unbiased, and that information is then fed out to healthcare professionals and to decision makers to decide about whether the side effects that are seen are directly related to vaccination. And so it is clear that there are some very rare side effects that are happening now with pretty much all of the vaccines that are in use across the world against COVID. And that's obviously unfortunate, but as we try to stress in the book, no intervention is risk-free, and not intervening, not taking an action is also not risk-free. And so those very rare side effects are unwanted, of course, but if they're unavoidable, we have to figure out how we take those into account when deploying vaccines in populations that clearly really need them, because COVID is a very, very serious disease. Sarah, do you have something to add on that?
Well, on any vaccine, when you get vaccinated, you'll be given a leaflet that describes the side effects that you might expect. And some of them are quite common. So it's common to have pain at the injection site. Not everybody gets it, but quite a lot of people will have a sore arm. It's quite common with some vaccines to have a short-lived fever or chills. And all of this is described. And we get that information from the clinical trials that we do. So by the time the phase 3 trials are completed, tens of thousands of people have been immunized, and all of these side effects in the first week or so after vaccination have been recorded. So we know how frequently they affect people, and we know that they tend to affect older people less than younger people. As the immune system ages a bit, you don't get so many of these side effects after vaccination. But then it's not until the vaccine's used in very large numbers that there's any hope of picking up the really rare adverse events after vaccination. And that's what the reporting systems are for. So the MHRA has the yellow card scheme, and people will send in reports. And through these reporting systems, it's possible to identify any really rare side effects after vaccination. And then, as Kath says, assess which populations we should continue using the vaccine in.
I'm interested because you talk a little bit in the book about, when vaccination becomes a political football as well. And I presume there is that issue where, because the news is about novelty, if you have 3 cases in 2 million people, those 3 of a bad reaction to a vaccine, they become front page news. And then I presume it can be quite a different political juggling act, where just saying this is always going to happen, do you have to sometimes at least appear to take a level? So this probably sounds a terrible way to put it, but how do you juggle actually just saying this is what happens when this number of people are vaccinated, and it's terrible if 3 people have this reaction, but you have to look at the statistics?
Yeah, so that's the job of the regulators, to look at these statistics, and then the policymakers who decide how to use the vaccine. You will get all kinds of things happening after vaccination. I mean, in the Moderna vaccine trial in the US, a volunteer was struck by lightning, and nobody thinks that lightning strike was anything to do with vaccination. And what's happening with these reporting systems is that you record everything that happens to people after vaccination. So we did one clinical trial in Baltimore where the most frequent serious adverse event after vaccination was gunshot wounds. Again, nothing to do with vaccination, but that particular population, there were people turning up with gunshot wounds. In Oxford, it tends to be cycling injuries.
Or pregnancy, sometimes pregnancy.
Yeah. So it depends where you are in the world. The kind of things that happen to people also happen to people when they've just been vaccinated. And then it can be really difficult sometimes to work out if those medical events have got anything to do with the vaccines or not. And that's why it takes a while to kind of build up a picture, because with anything that goes wrong, it's more likely to happen if you're older than if you're younger, and the adverse events happen to people all the time. That's why we start doing clinical trials with younger people. It's not that vaccines are dangerous to old people, it's that older people are dangerous to vaccine trials. Because if you start doing your vaccine trials in people over the age of 70 who are more likely to have adverse events in their life generally, then you can't tell whether those strokes or heart attacks or whatever it is that happened to people had anything to do with the vaccination, or whether they were going to happen anyway. So we always start with young, healthy people who are not likely to have things going wrong with them. And then that gives us a better opportunity to look at what the vaccine's doing before we then move on to testing the vaccine in older people at a slightly later stage of the trial. So it's always difficult to disentangle something that's going to happen normally in life and something that's happening as a consequence of the vaccination. And that's one of the things that the people looking at the reports coming in have to try to do.
Where would you recommend people go in terms of the most accessible and evidence-based sources for them when they might be perhaps worried about seeing a headline in a newspaper?
Public Health England are very good. The MHRA website, I mean, they're a bit dense and dry, but they're good. Somebody who's very good at talking about risk and how we assess risk is a columnist in The Guardian, an academic in Cambridge called David Spiegel. Do you know?
David Spiegelhalter, yeah, he's great.
David Spiegelhalter. I find him very clear on thinking about how we perceive risk and how we balance risks in our life. And Sarah and I try to touch on this in the book, that we are surrounded by risk. Sarah cycles to work every day across Oxford traffic and up the hill in busy bus lanes. And she does that knowing there's a risk for that. Yeah, cyclists die on the roads far too frequently in this country, but she does it because the benefit to her is high. It's good to get some exercise, get out in the fresh air, think about new vaccine design on the way to work. But so that's her risk benefit. You know, it's a risky thing to do, but she chooses to do it because it has benefits. And so that's a story that we tell in the book, but also that if it's snowing, Sarah does not get on her bicycle because the risk changes, because it's way more slippery and you're much more likely to fall under that bus. So we're trying to get people to understand that there is not one view of risk, and so there is not one number for whether you should or should not get vaccinated, depending on the incidence rate for a specific side effect, because it depends on the likelihood that you will have that side effect, which you obviously don't know, the amount of pathogen that's circulating in the population, because if you're more likely to catch COVID, you know, you really do want to be vaccinated against it. And there is also this issue, isn't there, of, I think you touched on it, and it is a hard topic to talk about, but the people that have a side effect, and we can treat them much better now because we understand them much more, so that's good. People that have side effects are people that we know about. They have names, they're our family, they're our relatives, we can pinpoint those. But the people who have benefited from the vaccination programme, and Public Health England say last week that 30,000 people in this country are alive today who would not be alive, 30,000 are alive today that would not be alive in England because of the vaccination programme, not ours and Pfizer and Moderna. And those 30,000 people, we don't know who they are, so they don't have a face to put against that story. And it's very hard for us to remember the 30,000 unknown people who are still here when we know about the few that have had an adverse event. And we're very bad, I think, at balancing risk in our own minds. But we're trying to do our best to explain it, and others also try very hard to put their view across. But it's not our job to tell you to get a vaccine. It's our job to give you the information that supports you to make what we think is the right decision. But we're not instructors, yeah? The regulators and the approval bodies are there to give the right advice to people. It's not our job. We just do the science bit.
Well, it's excellent. You've been very prescient as well, because the next question was,
yeah,
I feel like...
And I talk too much. I always talk too much.
No, it's perfect. No, you don't at all. But the question was, I feel like rational arguments from older relatives about how statistically insignificant the dangers of vaccination are not cutting through. What can I do? And I think you've given the answer to that, including the image there of the bus in a snowstorm as well. The next, another anonymous attendee would like to know, can we expect more pandemics of this scale or worse in the future? Will vaccination development get quicker with time? And I suppose we could add to that as well, that the worry about the number of variants, and as some people have been writing, the risk there will become a point where a vaccine is no longer nearly as effective. Sarah?
So will there be more pandemics in the future? Yes, there will be. We always expect another influenza pandemic. We just don't know when it's going to happen. But there are lots of other viruses out there, and as we've seen, they can now spread so quickly because you know, there's more contact between people and animals. A lot of the viruses are normally in animals, and then they spill over into human populations, and then very dense populations of people, lots of travel around the world. So the viruses travel with the people, and that means they spread quickly. So yes, there will be other pandemics. We don't know exactly when. And I think we will be able to make vaccines even more quickly next time, because all the vaccine developers have learned this time. And it should go faster in the future. But really, we would like to be able to control things at a stage where it's an outbreak rather than a pandemic. If we can get the vaccine development to the point where we can stop it spreading around the world, that would be perfect. But for diseases like influenza and the coronaviruses, respiratory pathogens that are transmitted so easily and spread so quickly, it's going to be very difficult to contain them. So we have to plan for more pandemics. In terms of variant vaccines, the concern now is that if we don't get vaccines everywhere in the world, there's going to continue being transmission of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And when you get transmission between people, that's when you have the opportunity for new mutations to arise and new variants to be selected. And it's possible that we end up with variants that are less related to the original virus, which is, of course, what we use to make the vaccine against. So it could be that the vaccine becomes less effective. I don't think it's going to suddenly become very much less effective, but we've already got a problem with more transmissible viruses. So the vaccine is actually highly effective against the Delta variant. We know that. Public Health England has published the data on that. For our vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. But the problem is that that virus spreads so quickly. So it's very much easier to catch that virus than it was the original one. And it's spreading through the population very rapidly. So even if the people who've been vaccinated only have very mild disease, there's still an awful lot of them. So we're still seeing transmission of that virus. And it means that for people in the population who aren't vaccinated, they have a very high risk of exposure to the virus because there's so much transmission. And if they're not vaccinated, they have the risk of getting severe disease, which is going to put more people in hospital.
Thank you. There's another similar question from the one before. My cousin says it's not natural to get a vaccine. I just wondered about, sometimes it seems like the voices of those against vaccines are very loud, but actually talking to people out there, I've heard that there's been some vaccine hesitancy, but overall there's been a very good uptake. I wonder how you feel about that, Kath.
I mean, vaccine uptake in this country is very high. I think that, we have been since the beginning trying to explain as we go along what it is that we're doing and the rationale behind it and the risks and the benefits involved. And I think also, of course, we had an enormous COVID outbreak in this country. We have more than 130,000 people dead. And so compared to other countries, we have seen firsthand how awful this disease is. And so I think that probably maps onto the fact that as a society, we have realised that for us, the way out of this pandemic is via vaccination. And we now start to see the differences in the rates of mortality that are occurring because people are vaccinated. We're not out of the woods yet. We only have just over 50% of our adult population fully protected. But I suspect that some of the reason that vaccine hesitancy has been dropping is because all of us have experienced firsthand how serious this disease is. And I hope that some of it is also to do with the fact that some of us as scientists and our media has actually been very sensible. We've had a lot of great science reporting in this country over the last year. Yeah, there've been the odd silly headline and those are the ones that we have struggled with. But in general, I think the quality of science reporting, trying to explain what the disease is, what the healthcare measures are that we can take, are that, I think we've all understood a lot more about this disease than any other in history. And our vaccine will be the most studied in history. And all of that data is publicly available. We're putting that out in open access journals for people to read. So I hope we start to have built some trust. And because we tell the truth, we're not hiding anything. And I hope that people are responding to that. But mostly, I think it's because we saw the worst that COVID can do.
And maybe we can just come back to what's not natural about vaccination. So we get viral infections all the time. actually less in the last year because we've all been secluded. But, you know, we get colds, we get flu, we get tummy bugs. They're all viral infections, natural viral infections. What we're doing with a vaccine is giving a very limited, very controlled viral infection that can't spread in the body, is just enough to stimulate the immune system to make a response that will then protect you when you counter the real virus. So it's a very natural process, but it's much safer than getting infected with the virus itself. I don't know why somebody would dismiss vaccination as unnatural. I think they need to understand how natural processes work. We interact with microorganisms all the time. That's a very natural thing to do.
Yeah, it's why you don't get chickenpox twice, yeah, because your immune system has seen chickenpox once and has learned, and therefore is protecting you against chickenpox. And that's all we're doing with vaccination, showing something to your immune system so that it recognises it again.
Also, but without making you ill.
Without making you ill.
Yeah. This is a lovely question, which is basically you're being compared to Apollo 11, which I like. And justifiably, I think. Do you think this pandemic and the inspirational work you and other biologists have done this year will inspire a new generation to go into STEM? Sarah?
Well, I hope so. And we've had a very good response from schools. Lots of people getting in touch to say that, you know, they have newfound interest in science. Now we need to sort out the careers for scientists, because as we talked about earlier, that's still pretty difficult. So we want a new generation of scientists and lots of good careers for them to go into.
Brilliant. Kath, do you want to add anything?
I think that's right. And I hope that people realise from some of the stories that come out that we tell and from other trials that science is a really diverse and interesting career. You get to work with all kinds of people. So you get to work with mathematicians and statisticians and engineers and business people. It can also be a business. And there's lots of need for all kinds of skills and therefore all kinds of people to come into science. And yeah, you know, Sarah and I will always complain about how tough it is, but we wouldn't do any other job, would we, Sarah? This is a job to do. It's a really interesting job, yeah? And so we want lots of bright people with diverse skill sets to think, yeah, that could be for me.
Brilliant. And this is an interesting one from Marion. Marion wonders, do you think in an ideal world that different amounts of vaccine should be given to people with very different body weights? Now, I know nothing about how that would. Kath, are you able to answer
No,
that?
that's Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah, no, the answer is basically no. That's not how it needs to work. It's not like a drug. So we can just have a standard dose for people with different body weights. One thing that we might need to think about for intramuscular injections is the length of the needle, because you do need to get it into the muscle. And with COVID vaccines, people have been thinking about using short needles because you lose vaccine in the needle and we don't want to waste any. That's the only thing where you might want to think about people with different body weights.
Another rather pragmatic question, which is, does the effectiveness of the vaccine disappear after a period of time? Do we need to get vaccinated every year going forward? Sarah?
So I don't think it's going to be every year. We're just starting to publish some data on the maintenance of the immune responses 6 months after vaccination. It's looking very, very good. That data is already out as a preprint. We will be tracking it. I think older people will probably need to be revaccinated more often than younger people because they won't keep the immune responses as long. But no, we're not going to be seeing the whole population needing to be revaccinated every year.
And this is lower. Kath, we'll start with you because I'm not sure how much you have baked during this time, Sarah, though you do mention some. What was the favourite thing you baked in Baking Club?
Oh yeah, so Zoom family baking, either Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings or whenever we could all get together. We had some true baking disasters. I am never attempting to make gnocchi again, never. Because that turns into potato soup and it's completely impossible. We made some very good scones, simple kind of old-fashioned recipes, very good. And I think I'll say, though I don't know if I'm allowed, we made Cornish pasties, but we weren't in Cornwall. So I think we just have to call them Cornish style pasties, but they were really tasty.
We see, I could make this a double whammy now and ask you exactly what you did with your scones. Did you put the jam first or the cream first?
Oh, no, that's easy because you split it in half and you put cream then jam on one half and jam then cream on the other and everybody's happy. Or
Yeah, well, I think that's for that. Yeah, the balance of the universe is. Thank you so much. We didn't have time to answer all of the questions, but they are answered in this Vaxxers, which is available now and is filled with. We had quite a few. I hope we've covered most of the questions there because there were quite a few that were covering similar ground. But thank you both very much. It is an incredible work, and I think that sense that people have of carrying with them something that of human achievement, of human imagination, and of scientific endeavor, which has changed the possibilities of so many people, is a wonderful thing. So thank you both for your time tonight, and I hope to see you again at some point.